Mas pinagtatag ng iba't ibang hamon ng panahon. Sa gitna ng bagyo, kalamidad, kakulangan at mga sitwasyong dumarating, patuloy kaming naglilingkod, patuloy sa paghatid ng napapanahong impormasyon, inspirasyon, lingap, pagmamalasakit at ang hindi nagbabagong mensahe ng pag-ibig ni Kristo sa pabago-bagong panahon. Sa pamamagitan ng radyo at makabagong teknolohiya, patuloy kaming umaabot. Ito ang Care 104.3 DWAY-FM, himpilan ng Far East Broadcasting Company sa Bicolandia, nagpapatuloy sa pag-abot sa buong Bicol Region at kahit saan man sa mundo, sa loob ng 52 taon hanggang marinig ng lahat.
Life can be challenging and can put our faith to the test, but we can find inspiration in real-life stories and powerful insights that can lift our spirits and hearts. Here now is Stories That Build Faith with Pastor Ron Bishop of Shepherd Shapers from San Antonio, Texas. Stories that build faith, because hope is just a story away.
Hello, I am Pastor Ron Bishop, coming to you from the United States, and I wanted to share with you several stories of faith. I want to talk to you today about the life of Joseph in Egypt. I'm very glad to be able to have this time to share with you and to take you on a journey, to let you realize some of the things throughout the scriptures, not only the scriptures, perhaps even some stories of my own as we continue down this road. But I want to share with you about how that Joseph was sold by his brothers into slavery, and he found himself walking down a road. Now, it was very important, if you listen, pay attention to the dreams of Joseph. It's very important for you to realize that Joseph was supposed to go to Egypt. He was supposed to be down there. The fulfillment of his dreams would be fulfilled there in the land of Egypt, but it would be out of character for a young Hebrew boy like Joseph to just strike out and make a decision to go to the land of Egypt on his own. First of all, he didn't know Egypt had anything to do with his future. But it was God's plan to even use the brothers that he had in order to be able to bring him to a place of fulfillment of what God wanted to do in his life. And so Joseph wound up sold by his brothers, cast into a pit, and then sold to slave traders. And these men carried all kinds of things. These men were traveling down the Silk Road, which goes all the way from China, all the way down through Egypt, and down to the land of Zimbabwe, to the Zimbabwe ruins. And so as this Silk Road was the road they were traveling on, why, after many days of walking, they probably traveled close to a month to get to the land of Egypt. It would not take a whole month to get to the land of Egypt, except that they were traveling and making deals and purchases all along the way. And so after many days of walking, the desert sands gave way to the more firmly packed streets of an Egyptian city. There were more people in this place than Joseph had ever seen. He was immediately aware of different accents, along with strange and just different smells. He was intrigued with the market atmosphere, the animals, and finally even the slave market. As Joseph was taken down this road, he would eventually come to the land, to the city of Heliopolis, as it was known then, and it's today known as Cairo. It's the land where the pyramids are, and my wife and I spent a month in Egypt, and traveling up and down the land of Egypt, and it would especially the Nile River, and there in the city of Heliopolis, and or Cairo, and so it was a fascinating experience. And after many days of walking, why, he found himself in this strange city with all the strange noises and everything. So he, after several days, he found himself placed upon a platform, because all the slaves were sold from a platform, just as you would place an animal there or somewhere. There was a spot that he was located on. And as he began to walk up on that spot, he was waiting to see what would happen next. He had no idea what was about to take place. But there was a man who had fastened his gaze on Joseph and recognized him for his intellect and his abilities, and he quickly made the arrangements, and the purchase was done. Joseph knew nothing of the man, what his assignment was to be with him. Later, he would find out his name was Potiphar. In moments, he found himself leaving all of those surroundings and going deeper into the city, into a residential area, and it had big and beautiful homes. And so, upon arrival, he was placed under the charge of the man responsible for all the slaves owned by Potiphar, the master of this huge household. And so Joseph was later able to learn that Potiphar was a member of the personal staff of Pharaoh, the king of Egypt. The Lord greatly blessed Joseph there in the home of his master, so that everything he did succeeded. When his master saw that the Lord was with him and that the Lord gave him success in everything, Joseph found favor in his eyes and was appointed to be Potiphar's personal aid. The thing about it, when God is on your side, it's like he shines a light over your head, and others can look around the room and they see everybody, but they don't necessarily want to look away from the one who's standing there, who has this special divine favor lit upon him. And so as Joseph was there in that room, why, Potiphar could not help. He couldn't have bought another slave unless he had bought Joseph. And so as he bought Joseph, why, there he went to the land of Egypt, and there he was in Potiphar's home. Potiphar had a number of titles and responsibilities. He was Pharaoh's chief executioner, captain of the king's bodyguard, and was responsible for the oversight of the king's prison. In effect, Potiphar was the chief of police. If anyone offended Pharaoh, it was the duty of such guards as Potiphar to destroy the offender, and that without giving him a trial. He was to take care of Pharaoh and to execute his will on all subjects of his displeasure. It is reasonable to conclude, as the prison was under the jurisdiction and responsibility of Potiphar, that Joseph would have had to include the prison as part of his responsibility. And so he probably, it seems, even became acquainted with the warden of the prison, because Potiphar was over that prison. And so he was over the warden who was over the prison. And this was a political prison. And so a place where anyone who had offended Pharaoh, or anyone who was there because of accusations, they had done things wrong, that they found themselves in such a place. And so as Joseph became responsible for that, he became friends with the warden. And I'm sure that the warden, just to think his thoughts, I'm sure that the warden must have on occasion wondered how good it would be to have someone of the character and ability and the giftings of Joseph to serve with him in the prison. He would have, because it says that Potiphar didn't have to worry about anything except the very food that he put in his own mouth. And so Joseph was a very powerful, very responsible young man. So as he served him and he was busy day after day after day, we do not know how long Joseph served in Potiphar's house before the problems began to rise up. But we do know that he was in Egypt a total of 13 years before God began to bring about some of those dreams that he had had earlier while still in the land of Canaan. And so we find that Joseph was there the total of 13 years, but in that period of time, we know that Joseph was cast into prison, and we'll come to that in a moment. But we see how that all this time, things had happened, all kinds of experiences had taken place. And so as Joseph is serving under Potiphar, it may have been a matter of 5, 6 years, you don't know. But finally it came to a point to where things began to start getting ready for when Joseph would have a chapter change that would enable him to come to a place where God would continue the fulfillment of his dreams. So Joseph was a strikingly handsome young man. And as time went on, his master's wife, I call this the boss's wife, his wife became confident that if she made her desires known to Joseph, for he was a handsome young man, she could easily persuade him to come and he would be with her, and that he would look upon it as a piece of happy fortune, that he could have a relationship with the wife of Potiphar. I'm sure she may have been beautiful. Who knows? I don't know. But she thought of herself as being in a high place of opportunity, and so she reached out to Joseph. And so as she did this, she said, she said to her, "Would you come and sleep with me?" Well, that is a difficult thing, and Joseph refused. He said, "Look, my master trusts me with everything in the entire household. He himself has no more authority here than I have. He has held back nothing from me except you, yourself, because you are his wife. I have no rights to come near you, and please, would you let me alone?" And he said, "How could I do such a wicked thing as this? It would be a great sin against my God." And so she pestered him day after day after day, but he stood his ground. He refused to go to bed with her, and he kept out of her way as much as possible. Then one day, as he was in the house going about his work, as it happened and no one else was around at the time, she came and grabbed him by the sleeve. "Sleep with me," she said. He tore himself away, but as he did, I envisioned what he must have done. As she grabbed the sleeve of one of his arms, he bucked up the other arm, the shoulder, and that sleeve, and then he turned himself around in such a way to where the coat just slid right off of him. And this was his second coat. The first coat had been the coat of many colors. This was a coat that was given to him by Potiphar. And so he had this coat on, but his first coat, he had buttoned it up nicely, and his brothers liked to kill him getting it off of him. But this one, he had learned, don't button the coat. Now, those are my thoughts. But I think it's interesting how that he had determined if they came after him with the first coat, nobody's going to get me for the second coat. And so he allowed that coat to slide right off of his arm and into her hands, and he was out the door and down the hall and out the door. And so as all of this happened, Joseph wound up recognizing that God was with him, but he had to live a godly life. And so as Joseph went and began to find himself a place to hide, she began to scream and she began to make noise. When Joseph fled from the house and he tried to find a place to hide, she recognized that this is not going to work out well, and she realized that she did not get what she had hoped for, and so she kept the jacket. And when her husband came home, that she began to scream, began to make all kinds of noise, and the men came into the room and they began to ask her what was going on, and she said, "My husband had to bring in this Hebrew slave to insult us," she sobbed. "And so he tried to rape me, but when I screamed, he ran, and I forgot to take his jacket with him." She kept the jacket, and when Potiphar came home that night, she told him her story. And so this was a very, very difficult thing. And as all of this was taking place, Joseph found himself being hauled in before Potiphar. As all of this happened, Joseph had lived his life in such a way as to keep himself always vigilant, on alert, and prepared to do the right thing. He knew that his destiny was in the hands of God, and that God required his children to maintain a high moral conduct. And so he also realized that Satan is always up to no good. Satan is always willing to try to slip his net over you when you're least expecting it. But Joseph was determined, being a man of character, that he would not allow this to happen. When Potiphar's wife falsely accused him, she brought this story that she was telling before Potiphar. Upon hearing her account of what had happened, Potiphar became furious. He had no one to know to tell him differently. And so he assumed that everything she said to him was accurate. And upon hearing her account Joseph was brought in, he ordered that Joseph be imprisoned, the same prison where king's prisoners were kept in chains. Also falsely accused. Although he was falsely accused, Joseph refused to fight for his rights. He did not defend himself, but rather stood there listening carefully at what Potiphar was accusing him of, based on what his wife's testimony was. And so Joseph did not defend himself. I think there are three things that I want to bring out that show me why Joseph did not attempt to defend himself. First of all, he was a slave. He had no rights. So his defense was not even to be considered. Potiphar may not have come face to face and in close range, but ordered him from across the court, therefore eliminating any personal contact and as a result, reaffirming the low state of a slave. And even though he was the administrator over all of Potiphar's affairs, the fact remains that he was a slave and he was owned by Potiphar. And secondly, to accuse his master's wife of a crime was almost the same as if he had accused the master himself. So Joseph knew better than to open his mouth. He didn't say a thing. He may have received the death penalty if he had dared to attack her character in any way. Joseph trusted God. He did not, this is the third thing, Joseph trusted God. He did not wish to fight his own battles, but rather to leave them to God, who is more able to make everything right in the end. God was more powerful than those who would inflict punishment upon him. And so Joseph found himself being taken to the prison, the same prison that he himself had worked with. The warden, he was taken to that same prison, and so Joseph was arrested and taken as a criminal from the court of Potiphar to the prison. A grave cloud hung over him in the minds of those who saw what was happening in his life. Whether guilty or innocent, there would be no trial, therefore no chance of acquittal. Every time only time would take would be able to reveal what was really going to happen. And so Joseph had to be patient. The favor and respect in the heart of Potiphar for Joseph was on hold, and perhaps even worse, against the backdrop of his wife's wailing. This was not the time for discussion. Not anytime soon would Joseph be able to defend himself. Joseph would actually have to trust God to defend him. And so God was going to have to work all the details out. In the meantime, Joseph maintained his innocence, but he said nothing. And so he probably never even held a discussion with the warden as to what had really gone on. And so favor often comes from the most unlikely places. And so it was that the jailer found a respect for Joseph and showed him kindness. And so it became, the story continues again, very similar to what had happened when he had come under the ownership of Potiphar. He now finds himself being favored by the warden, and this warden is giving him responsibilities, so much so that it sounds like the story would continue that he didn't have to worry about anything except the very food that he would put in his own mouth. And so this prison and this chief jailer had no worries after that, for Joseph took care of everything, and the Lord was with him, so that every detail ran smoothly and well. The keeper of the prison, or the prison warden, was already a part of Joseph's network, as I said, and so he was acquainted with him. As Potiphar's personal aide, he had already been overseeing this prison, and so now he had likely visited this prison many times. Prison life now for Joseph was certainly not as good as walking freely on Potiphar's employ, but still it was not so bad for him. He had immediately been shown special favor and was granted privileges uncustomary for normal prison life. Joseph was even invited to eat a better diet than the rest of the prisoners. And so Joseph basically had a run of the whole prison. He would go back and forth. He would do cell check. He would check on everybody who was in there, whoever it was. He knew everyone who was there. And because this was as if he is just a man who is just serving under the responsibilities. He's a deputy. And so it's not clear how many years Joseph served in Potiphar's home, or how long he was in that prison. But it spanned the entire time of 13 years when he was sold into slavery, when he was brought before Pharaoh to interpret Pharaoh's dreams. Day by day, Joseph conscientiously cared for his fellow prisoners and saw his work as an opportunity to serve without resentment. He didn't seem to take his attitude with him. I think that would be a very good lesson for all of us, should we find ourselves in distasteful situations, even if we've been falsely accused, to be able to have the right spirit, not to have war in your spirit, but to find a life of peace and to walk in a way of righteousness in the midst of whatever your life circumstances are. So sometime later, a day came to Potiphar that he would change his life in so many ways. But he had some opinions. He didn't know about his own wife and what she had done. And I don't know when he would have discovered it, if he did at all. But it was a normal day on the day when Potiphar arrived to the palace on this day, and he found circumstances to be quite sensitive. The mood, this is when he went to see Pharaoh, why Potiphar found himself going there, and things were not right in the mood of Pharaoh was explosive because of something the cupbearer and the chief butler and the chief baker had done. It is obvious that their offense had something to do with the food services because of their roles with the palace. It's clear that they had offended Pharaoh in some way, because the chief butler, his responsibility was to serve the wine to the king and to do other personal errands or whatever he needed like that. And it was the responsibility of the chief baker to prepare foods for the king. So it was clear that something to do with the food services was what had been the offense committed. And so Potiphar had responsibilities, as he always did, by stepping in as the captain of the guard. He took responsibility immediately, the chief butler and the baker, and he took them to the prison. So his responsibility was to make sure that the offenders were quickly taken from the king's view and dealt with swiftly and outside of public view. As this took place, Potiphar handed over the chief baker and the chief butler and the chief baker to Joseph. And when he got to the prison, he found out Joseph was the one who was taking care of everyone, for he was now the head trustee of the prison. And so this is the point when Potiphar's day had likely changed the most. In going to the king's palace, he transported these men to the prison house. Upon arriving at the prison, handing over the butler and the baker to Joseph, why, he probably wondered, I wonder if I misjudged Joseph back then. I wonder if I lost for no real justifiable reason the service of this very good man. But he had no way to find out the answer. And so they just continued on. And so this encounter with Joseph would bring back strange things. He was wondering, did he really try to rape my wife? I never would have expected he would be guilty of such a thing. And the big question was, with this, had he solicited Joseph, had she solicited Joseph to a midday tryst with her? And so as he thought of all these things, why, he had to just let it stay where it was, for there was nothing he could do. As Potiphar was concerned, the prison warden really had it made. He remembered, possibly with regret, that when Joseph worked in his house, he was the fortunate one. And he realized all those days are gone now. And those are worrying thoughts. As Joseph recorded their arrival, it was not clear just what the butler and the baker had done. It's not even clear in the scriptures. The king was offended, however, and as all of that had taken place, why, it was serious enough for them to have lost their favor and be remanded to the prison. One morning, as Joseph was making his rounds to each part of the prison, he came upon the chief cupbearer and the chief baker. They were not taking their incarceration in this prison with grace, and the morning seemed to be especially difficult for them. The cupbearer responded when Joseph asked him, "Why are you so discouraged this morning? Why do you have such long faces?" And as he began to ask them these questions, why, they began to tell him, well, I've had dreams, and we both had dreams last night, and we don't understand them, and there's no one here, for the king has such people who are wise enough to be able to interpret dreams, but we have no one like that around us. And so we're here in this prison. As Joseph continued listening, both the men had these dreams, and so Joseph said, don't interpretations come from God? Tell me the dreams, and I believe he will give me the interpretation. So the chief butler and the baker began to share the dreams. The first one was the chief cupbearer, the chief baker, and he was the one more concerned because his responsibility was a higher position than was the baker. And so he began telling his dreams quickly. He told how in his sleep he had seen 3 clusters of grapes hanging upon 3 branches of a vine, large and ripe for gathering. He squeezed them into a cup which the king had held in his hand, and when he had strained the wine, he gave it to the king to drink, and he received it from him with a pleasant countenance. The chief cupbearer then concluded his story, asking Joseph, "If you have any understanding in such matters, please tell me what this vision could be foretelling." Joseph smiled and spoke encouragingly to the chief cupbearer. He said, "Be of good cheer and expect to be loosed from your bonds in about 3 days. In 3 days you will be released, for the king desires your service. He misses you and is about to restore you again to it." He continued, "This is what it means. The 3 branches are 3 days. Within 3 days, Pharaoh will lift up your head and restore you to your position, and you will put Pharaoh's cup into his hand, just as you used to do when you were his cupbearer. But when all this goes well and you and everything is good for you, remember me and show me kindness, and mention me to Pharaoh and get me out of this prison. For I was forcefully carried off from the land of the Hebrews, and even here I have done nothing to deserve being put in a dungeon. And so some life's chapters are less desirable than others. Certainly Joseph's time in prison. We try to end the unpleasant ones as quickly as possible in the hope that the next chapter will be better. And that's what Joseph was attempting to do, and asking the guy, please, will you remember me to Pharaoh so that he might pardon me? As all of this is happening, I'm going to conclude the story right there for today. And as I've shared that story, we'll have more to come, because now comes the dream of the baker, the chief baker. But as we see what has taken place here, it's one of the most enjoyable, most interesting stories of all of the scriptures. And I want you to realize that whatever you go through in life, there is a God who is watching out for you. If you keep your heart right now, if you live a life that is filled with the flesh and follows after the ways of the world, if you do not yield your life to Jesus Christ, then I cannot suggest to you that it will turn out good, because in the end, many people's lives do not turn out to be pleasing to them. But I want you to know, if you do the right thing, if you live the right way, if you live a morally godly life, He will stand with you. He will have your back. And in the end, He'll be able to say to you, well done, thou good and faithful servant. And so today, as I'm Pastor Ron Bishop, and I'm here today to talk with you about stories of faith, and I want you to be encouraged today and put your trust in the Lord. Let me pray with you as we end this session. Father, I thank you for all that you have done. I thank you, dear God, because you have given your strength, you have given your help, you have been with us through every circumstance. I pray, Lord, that today you will do great things in our lives and cause us to recognize that you are the Lord of our lives and you're the Lord of the universe, and all is well. God bless you and have a very good day.
You just heard the program Stories That Build Faith with Pastor Ron Bishop of Shepherd Shapers from San Antonio, Texas. We hope you've found the inspiration in the story you heard today. For your comments and suggestions, you may contact us at 0998-843-0573. You may also email us at info@dway.febc.ph. Our Facebook page is Care 104.3 The Way FM.